Assumptions, Greg Baker.
I am guilty. Guilty of making the 3 deadly assumptions. Assumption number 1, I assume that I am more important than I really am. When I was 19 years old, my father bought his second restaurant and put a know-nothing, inexperienced manager in charge. Biggest mistake of his business life. And boy, did I strut into that restaurant the first day thinking I was something. I strutted around there for the first couple of weeks. I had my yellow pad in hand and my pen, and I watched him like a hawk. I watched everything they did. I sat down in the corner of the dining room and watched them, and I wrote down everything they did wrong. And after about 2 weeks, I went out and I put a note on the bulletin board, employee meeting next week. And when that employee meeting came, I let them have it with both barrels. I walked in there with guns blazing. I told them every single thing they were doing wrong. And I stomped out of that meeting and went back to my office and sat down and went, boy, that was stupid. I took all my notes and wadded them up and threw them in the trash can, and on a yellow sheet of paper I got out the big black pen and I wrote another note. And I went out to the bulletin board and I took a steak knife out of the utensil drawer and I stabbed the steak knife. The note said, next week, your turn. And next week came and I sat there with my hands folded and I listened to them tell me everything I was doing wrong. A lesson I never forgot. Assumption number 2. I assume that I know what people's motives are. I know what you're thinking. I know what you mean. The company I work for now, I spent 14 months as a recruiter, which meant that I spent 14 months trying to convince unemployed software engineers and retired military people that it was their lifelong dream to climb into the cab of an 18-wheeler and spend 3 to 5 weeks away from home at any given time. I don't mind telling you, it was not an easy job. And it required a lot of phone calls, a lot of computer time, a lot of visits, a lot of convincing people that that was their lifelong ambition. One man, Scott, I think I spent more time with him than anybody I recruited in 14 months. Hundreds of phone calls, visits, computer time, all this stuff that goes along with trying to get someone into truck driving school and then into a truck. And on the day of orientation, Monday morning, Scott didn't show up. I was furious. I called and called and called. I bet you I called 25 times that day. No answer. Next day I called 10 or 15 times. And every day for the next 2 weeks I called, no answer. And after about 3 months of calling once a week, I finally got a hold of someone. Hello? May I speak to Scott? Well, Scott's not here right now. This is his brother. Could I help you? Well, this is Greg Baker with Swift Transportation, and I had Scott scheduled for orientation to drive truck for us. And he didn't show up, and I'd just like to know what happened. His brother told me the night before he was supposed to be in orientation, his daughter was killed in a car accident. I assumed I knew what Scott's motives were. Assumption number 3. And I think this assumption is more important to Toastmasters than any of the assumptions. I assume that people want to hear what I have to say. For about 15 years, my wife and I operated one of those 1-hour film processing labs. You remember film, little brown strips of plastic. Ever remember those? Well, we also did photography and weddings and passport and immigration photos. Nice little business. And my favorite thing to do when I took someone's portrait was to go through all the pictures that I'd taken, and when they came in, I'd lay down the 3 pictures that were my favorite, and I'd say, I like this one, and this one, and this one. Well, one time a lady walked in, and I pulled out her pictures, and I was so proud. I set them down. I went, these are my 3 favorites. And she stepped back from the counter and crossed her arms. And looking at the picture, I could tell that she'd stepped back, and I looked up at her over my eyelashes. And she said, well, your opinion really doesn't matter, does it? Yes, ma'am, it doesn't. And I went back to work. I am guilty of committing the 3 deadly assumptions. But every day I remind myself that maybe I shouldn't assume, because we all know what happens when we assume. Madam Toastmaster.